Hi everyone, this is Ellen Cooper. I'm a student at Turing School, and today I'm just going to share a part of my application called Not Here to Make Friends. Not Here to Make Friends is a fantasy league application for the Bachelor and Bachelorette TV shows. The part I want to show you today is the drag and drop functionality for the drafting. So I'll just walk you through the code and you'll see how that actually gets implemented. So when you draft for your team, you go over here to the draft room and you drag and drop the players into the order that you want, and then you go down here and submit your draft picks. So we'll go over here to the code and I'll show you how that works. So this is my draft picks JavaScript file. And we have a function called set draft picks. So that takes care of all the drag and drop functionality for those for the drafting. And to do this, we're using a JQuery plugin called HTML5 Sortable. And that's just basically like a little JQuery library that will give me the drag and drop functionality so that I don't have to write a ton of code to get that going. So the library comes with a method called sortable, and we're calling that on the sortable div. So I'll just show you that in the HTML here. So this div that holds all of the contestant cards is the sortable div. It has the class of sortable on it. So that's what we're calling this method on, and it basically activates the drag and drop functionality. And then we're adding an event listener called sort stop. So the sort stop event is also something that comes with that jQuery plugin. And that event is essentially when I drag a card and then I drop it, that triggers the sort stop event. So when that occurs, this code will get executed. So the first thing that happens is we set a variable called updated order to an empty array. And then we grab all of the draft cards and loop through them. So the draft cards are these bars right here. So every contestant has a draft card. You can see they have the classes of draft card and card. So jQuery is just grabbing all of those cards, and there are 30 of them in this case because we have 30 contestants for this season. So for each card, we're going through and we're creating a JavaScript object that has two attributes. So first we have the ID attribute, and this is the actual ID of the contestant in my database. So jQuery is grabbing this from the HTML. So you can see right here, Peter has a data ID of 2. So that's his ID in my database. And then the second thing we're doing is we're setting their position. So this loop has the variable I, and it increments for every pass through the loop. So when we start here, we have Peter's number 1. So for him, I will be 0. And then since we want our positions to start at 1, we'll add 1 to that variable. And so once we've created this object for every person, we're pushing that onto the updated order array that we created up here. So after we're done looping through all 30 of these cards, we have 30 of these objects in our array. So 1 for each contestant. And then the next step is for us to use something called Ajax to send this data to a different part of my application that will ultimately be responsible for updating the database with the new draft picks. So this is the URL that specifies where in my application I'm sending this data. And then over here on line 13, we have the actual data element. So we're actually sending the updated order array in this request. So that request will go over to the draft picks controller, and specifically it'll go to the update method here. And the reason for that is because the way I have it set up is that when you draft a team or when you start a team, you automatically have some default draft picks, much like fantasy football. There's just a default order. And then when you go and you do your draft, you're actually updating that default order. So the picks are already in the database. So that's why we're doing an update. And so the first step is to find the team that we're drafting for. So over here, when we made the Ajax request, we're sending in the ID of the team. So for example, whatever the ID is for team here for the wrong reasons, we're grabbing that from the HTML and sending it in this request. So then in the update method, we'll use that ID to do a database lookup and find that team that we're drafting for. So we'll set that to a variable called team. And then the next step is to take the actual order, the updated order array. So by doing params order, we're accessing that array, and then we're going to loop through it. So for each element in the array, the first thing we do is we have to actually grab the draft pick that we want to change. So we do this using the contestant ID. So for the team in question, we're accessing all their draft picks, and then we're doing a lookup in the database by the contestant ID. So that's the ID that we passed in over here. So we'll have the ID of Peter, and then our update function will use that ID to find the table entry. So we'll save that to a variable, and then we'll call update on that variable. And what we're updating is the rank of the draft pick. So for example, if I'm moving Adam up here from number 3 to number 1, his position will be updated here as we saw, and then this is what's actually changing his position in the database. So the rank will be set to number 1. And after we're done doing that for all 30 players, we'll call an update function on the actual team, and we'll say that has drafted is now true. And this will be helpful to me in other parts of the application because it helps me determine what message we want to display for that team. So if they haven't drafted yet, we'll have a message prompting them to draft, but once they've drafted, we'll show them their draft order and allow them to update that. So that's basically how that works. And just something interesting to point out is that this whole process happens when every time I drag a card. So that updated the order right then when I dragged Dean's card. And so it's kind of deceiving that there's this submit draft picks button, and because that's all that's really doing is doing the redirect back to the team homepage. And yeah, that just allows the order to be saved, if the page was closed for some reason. And it's also just there for the user experience because people like to kind of signify that they're done with that process. So that's how that works. Hopefully you found that interesting. Thanks.